Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
After finishing my degree, university degree, I really didn't feel like working immediately. I thought I want to see if there's other purpose in life, and there was a little bit of spiritual interest that was aroused at college mainly because of that time, the late 60s. People were very much interested in Asia, in yoga, not so much yoga, but Eastern philosophy, if you want to call it that. So we were a bit exposed to that, so a bit interested. So after finishing my course, my first contact with Srila Prabhupada was, like many of us, was through his books. It wasn't so much through, personal contact even. I never really knew of the existence of the Hare Krishna movement at all, what to speak of Srila Prabhupada. So I was just literally visiting, hanging out with some of my ex-college mates. We were all into intoxication, LSD and this and that. I'd already vowed, I had an interesting experience which convinced me not to take any more intoxication of any kind, actually. And I was still, hanging out with my friends from those days. So then I was staying with them, and they were, you could say, a little intoxicated on that, whatever they were taking. I wasn't indulging, so I was just looking for something to occupy my time. And they had a large selection of literatures in their apartment in England, and I was just looking for the books and magazines, and nothing really interested me very much. I wasn't particularly interested at that time in going to a career or anything at that time, and I was just looking for something. So right at the bottom of the pile of literature, I found, that's my first contact, I found 2 magazines, Back to Godhead magazines. There weren't so many books in those days in '71, at least not in England. Magazines were the main thing I heard they were distributing. So it was my first contact. I read the magazines throughout the night, back and forth. It just triggered off an immediate attraction. Started chanting Hare Krishna straight away. We'd heard the Maha Mantra before in various ways, but I never connected it. So then that made everything clear. It wasn't just Srila Prabhupada's articles, everyone's articles. There were so many devotees, Janananda and Satsvarup, and different devotees were writing articles in those magazines, and it was really convincing for me. He just put together everything that was sort of like come in contact with. It made sense. It put everything in order. It made everything, directional. Everything before, not really a clear direction, spiritually speaking. It's so clear. And Prabhupada made everything very clear. Made obvious what the goal is and how to achieve that goal. So I was convinced just by reading, literally convinced just by reading those 2 magazines.
I studied material science at university, Oxford I was. I was agnostic then. Previously I'd been Christian, then I lost faith at university. I went to Africa, I was staying there for some time, and I realized at that time that material science couldn't explain life, couldn't explain consciousness. I went back to UK, I started practicing Zen. I went to Japan, I became a Zen monk, and I practiced there for 2 years, but I wasn't satisfied. I came back, and I'd lost contact with the material. I had no interest in having a job or anything like that on the one hand, and on the other hand I didn't know what kind of spiritual path to follow. So finally I cut myself off from everybody, and then I prayed to God, probably the first time in 10 years, if you exist, please help me. And then next day I was looking for a telephone. I walked and walked and walked in London, and finally I found a telephone box. It was occupied. So while I was waiting, a devotee came out of an apartment on the other side of the road. So I didn't know, but there were 2 places in London where devotees were living, and I'd stopped right opposite one of them. And then while I was waiting for the phone, one of them came, and we started talking. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for a spiritual path." I think I should chant the holy name, but I don't know what holy name to chant. So he said, oh, you should come with me, we do it all the time. So that was it. 3 days later, I was shaved up and off in the Sankirtan van. That was in 73, at the end of 1973.
Well, the first time I met Srila Prabhupada was, I'd only been in the movement a few months. That was in 73. And it was a very brief encounter. We had driven from Denver to New Vrindavan for the New Vrindavan festival. There were probably 8 devotees who packed into a little Toyota pickup with a camper on the back. And we took off and went from Denver straight through to New Vrindavan. And when we got there, that time of year, the weather is a little unforgiving. And so it was rainy, muddy, and this and that. But we were so much into the experience that we didn't really care. It was quite amusing. And the devotees who were living there in New Vrindavan at the time, this was the original farm where Vrindavan Chandra lived, and right next door was Kirtananda's place, and Prabhupada was staying there. We went up a little bit further into the hills where they had a pandal set up and a garden for cooking, a kitchen, that's what it was. And that's where we stayed. We just camped out in the bushes. And you know, that time of year it rains, so it rained. But anyway, we were so blissful just to be there. And all I could meditate on was the moment I would be able to see Srila Prabhupada. And the old temple room there where Vrindavan Chandra were residing was a very small little house. The temple room is really, really small. And it was so packed out, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't get close. I happened to get into the doorway, and to the left would be the deities, and straight ahead would be Srila Prabhupada. And all the assembled devotees would have their backs to the deities looking at Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada sat in his Vyasasana. He was, I don't remember the conversation. I don't remember the discourse. All I can remember was looking at him, this beautiful man who I'd been meditating on forever. And in Denver, all we had was a picture of Srila Prabhupada on the Vyasasana. So I just had it in my mind to see this wonderful golden person. And I was just mesmerized. All I could do was just look at him as he had his eyes, as his eyes were gently scanning the devotees, and sometimes he would close them and he would speak, and it was just an out-of-world experience. I can never forget it. It's just totally ingrained in my mind. Despite the whatever inconveniences we had to go through, in the morning the devotees would bathe in this little hole right next to the Goshala. They happened to have a piece of wood, or I think it was a pallet or something like that, and the devotees would take this cold stream in the morning and take a bath. But it didn't matter, you know. We were just so grateful to be there.
The first encounter came in 1966. I was walking down the street near Tompkins Square Park, and I happened to live 2 blocks away. And I didn't realize, but other devotees were in that area at that time. But it was before anything that was happening, and Prabhupada walked down the street, and so he was by himself, and there was nobody with him. So that meant it was way before this whole thing started. And so I was like, walking through the park every day. Then I got a job uptown on Madison Avenue, where I was an illustrator for an advertising agency doing Duncan Hines, Procter & Gamble stuff, and I got into the commercial art line. But I graduated from one of the toughest art schools in America, in Los Angeles, Art Center School. And there I was, I majored in book illustration. Now, had I stopped and talked to Prabhupada at that time, I would have been in the beginning, but I missed it. So I got the job and I got into a fellowship and I went to Italy. So all that is background. And I joined in Miami, my wife, and we came to the temple, and it was a flip of a coin, was it going to be the TM guys or the Haris? And so it came to be the Haris, and Narhari was the guy to answer the phone. He says, yeah, we just had a big, huge feast here, a Sunday feast. We'll save a plate for you. And so ultimately, the prasad was knocked out, absolutely amazing. It was the mangoes and every kind of preparation. Then I started doing some paintings. There was a banyan tree there, and I did a banyan tree painting with Radha Krishna under the tree. That got taken to Los Angeles, and Prabhupada heard that an artist had joined by Avirama telling the story. So I got swapped for a Jadharani painting. Avirama got the Jadharani painting, and I got to be in LA and working on the books. And so the first morning, Prabhupada came out for darshan, and he looked at me and he said, well, finally you've come. It wasn't a verbal thing, but it was coming into my head, like, directly.
Yeah, Prabhupada was really amazing in this sense, because we had no neck beads, we had no kurtas, nothing like that. We just had one dhoti. We only had one dhoti each. We didn't have more than that. It wasn't really a dhoti, just a piece of nylon cloth, t-shirt. No one had. I don't know if anyone had. I certainly didn't have tulsi beads. Practically nobody did. Whatever beads you're already chanting on, those were the beads Prabhupada chanted on. I don't know of, maybe some did, but most of the devotees I knew did not have new sets of beads. Prabhupada wasn't like fussy about these things. It's not the externals, it's the internals. It's receiving the pure holy name from a pure devotee in parampara. So he whatever beads we gave, and the temple president, Dhananjaya Prabhupada, had given these beads to Prabhupada or Pradyumna, somebody had given them, and Prabhupada was to chant all these beads. So, and when we were sat down there for initiation, and the names were called out, and then we went up to get our beads in little groups of 3, and Prabhupada looked at us, and he saw we had no neck beads. He said, where are the neck beads? He'd already given a lecture. He said, where are the neck beads? We had no neck beads. We didn't have neck beads. So Mr. Prabhupada said, you have to have neck beads. So somebody brought neck beads. We went and sat down again, and somebody put neck beads on us all, So we sat down, and names were called out again. This time they were called out in different orders. He had like this lucky dip. In English we have a lucky dip bag. Pradyumna had this bag, and we just pull the beads out of the bag. And this time my name wasn't called out at all. Everybody's name was called out. My name was not called at all. I don't know what was going on. I was convinced what was going on, but I didn't really know. Convinced, I suppose, in one sense, what had happened. And then it was finished, and the yajna began. My name wasn't called out. I had no name, no beads. The yajna went on, and I didn't know what to do, I was supposed to throw the grains in, or what I was supposed to do, I didn't know. Prabhupada was still sitting there on the Vyasa stand. And the yajna was finished. Pradyumna finished the yajna. And I was still sat there like completely lost. I thought, there's a lesson here. You can't cheat Krishna or his pure devotee. You can't cheat them. I really thought that, the truth is the truth. You can't, It's like we hear stories now. We didn't know there's stories then of people disguising themselves, like Rahu disguising himself as a demigod or something and trying to get the nectar. I felt like that, I felt like, I was a complete, demon or something, and I really wasn't eligible. So that's it. It's proof that I'm just not eligible to get this, connection, the pure devotee of the Lord. It certainly made me think like that anyway. But after the yajna was finished, Dhananjaya Prabhu came up to me and said, "What's your name?" And I said, I don't have one. I'm still the same name. And he said, "Oh, that's..." And he went running over to see Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was just about to get into his car to go back to Bury Place. The program was carrying on, but Prabhupada was leaving. And so, I don't know what they said, but he talked to Pradyumna, and Pradyumna talked to Srila Prabhupada, and then he said something back to Dhananjaya, and Dhananjaya came back to me and said, "Prabhupada said you have to go back to the temple straight away." I saw what happened is that Pradyumna put his hand in his bag and realized there was one more set of beads. I saw him pick it out of the bag. So he was a bit surprised. And then he told me I had to go back to the temple, so I had to run back to Bury Place straight away. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I was thinking Srila Prabhupada might tell me now, "Please go away. We don't need people like you in the movement." I didn't know what he was going to say. I was so, feeling like, unqualified and, like that. So I went back and I waited. There was hardly anyone in the temple. The Pujari, maybe one other devotee, practically nobody. Everyone was on the square. And Pradyumna was there, of course, with Prabhupada. And maybe Nanda Kumar was cooking. I don't know what he was doing. But only Pradyumna was there in Prabhupada's room with Prabhupada. He told me to wait outside. I was like waiting outside, and I was kind of pretty nervous. I didn't know what it was almost, I felt like I was going into the dentist clinic or something. I was quite nervous. And then Pradyumna came out and he said, "Okay, you can go in now." Now Pradyumna was one devotee I could always relate with. I had a very, I don't know, he made you feel very comfortable. He was amazing. I had a kind of a loving relationship with him in a sense. So, yeah, I felt I was comfortable with Pradyumna. He said, "Now," I thought he was going to come in with me, but he said, "Go in now." I said, "You come in?" He said, No, on your own." I was like, oh my God. So I went in, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting behind he had a glass desk. He was sitting behind the desk and on the floor. He was generally, I can't say I ever saw Prabhupada sit at a table. Obviously he sat in chairs sometimes, but I never saw. Always sitting on the floor, on the cushion. One thing about Srila Prabhupada, he was always, even other people were sitting up. It was not, he would always sit on like that, So we would too, of course. Sometimes still do. And Prabhupada sat there, and I went in. I didn't know what to say. Prabhupada looked at me, and I was kind of, I guess he could see I was really nervous or something, because that was my nature. And anyway, he looked at me. I paid my obeisances, and I sat there in front of Srila Prabhupada. And he looked at me and he asked me usual things, what are the regulated principles. It all came about. It was very quick. I know what I was going to say. He didn't say anything personal, so beyond that, I was expecting the worst. But he asked me what the regulated principle was if I was chanting 16 rounds. So I answered that. Somehow or another I managed to answer it. And then he picked up the very same beads. And the beads were not even made of wood. Some of them were made of dough, flour and water. We had no wooden, some of us had no wooden beads even. Some of them were wood, some of them were made of dough. I put them in the oven and cooked the beads in the oven to make the dough hard. And I was chanting, no knots between, just strung around a string. Nothing like, very simple. And Prabhupada chanted on those beads. And then he gave me the beads. He told me my name, told me what it meant, paid my obeisances. He said, offer your obeisance. This is one lesson which I had 3 times from Prabhupada. Offering obeisances. There's more to offering obeisances than just mechanics. It's from the heart. But the externals, probably because I'm external, I'm not a mature devotee in that sense. But Prabhupada was very, even externally, he gave me these lessons 3 times. 1, 2, 3. This is the first. And he said, offer your obeisances properly. So, because he gave me the beads, you see, so I had the beads in the right hand, and one hand on the floor, and one hand holding the beads. So put both hands on the floor. Put the beads back on, I put the beads on the table, offer my obeisance with both hands. And then I sat up, and I was about to go, and he said, And then he opened his tiffin. And this time he had Simply Wonderfuls in the tiffin. So he had Simply Wonderful, a very famous sweet from those days. And Prabhupada pulled out a Simply Wonderful and gave me a Simply Wonderful. So because I love Simply Wonderful, so I did that anyway. And again, I went to offer my obeisance. This time I had the Simply Wonderful in my hand. And when Prabhupada said the same thing again, offer your obeisance with both hands flat on the floor. So I did it again. It's like, when am I ever going to learn? I still don't do it. And so then I did that, and then I picked up the beads, and I picked up the Simply Wonderful, and this time I left. He told me the name, meaning, and everything. And then I left and went outside the room. It was all quite quick. So that was my only very close interaction with it.
I traveled a lot. Germany, I went to East Africa. I was in Kenya for a couple of years. Came back. I was in UK. Then I went to America to work with the Institute, Bhaktisiddhanta Institute. Before that, I went to India. I spoke at the Life Comes From Life conference when Srila Prabhupada was there. About a month before he left. And then I came back. Then I went to America, working with the Institute. Then I was working as a Gurukul headmaster. Then I went to Scandinavia, back to UK. A lot of traveling. First initiation, I suppose that was 1974. Janmashtami. Quite a lot of us got initiated, not straight from Srila Prabhupada. As far as I remember, it was Dhananjaya who kind of gave us the mantra, on behalf of Prabhupada, I suppose. Second initiation, not that long after that, I think. I went to Germany, maybe when I came back. So that was by tape recorder. So I didn't receive either first initiation or second initiation from Srila Prabhupada personally. When I was in UK, I asked her, there was like a morning walk. We were walking with Prabhupada. So that time, Hamsadutta had introduced distribution of gramophone records. And they were, making huge amounts of money. So I asked Srila Prabhupada whether this is a good idea to sell gramophone records. He says, yes. But he said, but they may not understand, they may take it as sense gratification, so better distribute my books. So that was like, I think that was quite an important conversation. Devotees were interested in that reply from Srila Prabhupada.
A couple of days later after initiation, it may have been 1 or 2 even, I can't remember, but very soon after that, they asked me to cook. As in those days, you didn't have to be Brahmin necessary to cook for Radha Krishna. At least, if there wasn't anyone, it was like that. We even had, in that 72, there were 2 uninitiated girls. They were Indian girls from Kenya. They were cooking. Sometimes they were cooking for Radha Londonishwar. They weren't even initiated. Prabhupada even encouraged them to do it. I heard that Prabhupada encouraged. It wasn't so, we weren't so many Brahmins, I suppose, in those days anyway. And anyway, they asked me to cook, so I cooked the breakfast. I'd never cooked before. And for the day, I had very little idea. But then I brought the plate upstairs. We had to take the plate up. Prabhupada was giving a lecture in Bury Place. We did Bhagavatam class in the morning. And there was no separate door to the deity room. We had to go through the temple room, to the curtain, and offer it. So I went in and gave it to the Pujari. Prabhupada was giving a lecture. He must have looked at me because I was offered, I was like looking for a place to offer my obeisances before going back to the kitchen. And the temple was crowded. It was full of devotees listening to class. So then I found a space, to offer my obeisances, but it was at an angle with my feet slightly towards the deities. Prabhupada was sat right next to the deities. As you look at the deities, he was on the right side. His vyasam was right next to the altar. It's a small temple, very small temple room. So, it covered a fair bit of the front of the temple, actually. And I just managed to get enough space to offer obeisances, but I had my back more or less to the deity. I didn't really see much choice. At least I didn't think I did. So then I went back to the kitchen, and after the class was over, Nanda Kumar came down and said, Srila Prabhupada told me to offer your obeisances properly. Never offer your obeisances with your feet to the deity, he said. He probably said, tell that boy to offer his obeisances properly, I'd imagine, something like that. So this is the second time I got another lesson in obeisances. Well, I finished the obeisances off. But we never finish offering obeisances. Our life is based upon that. That's what I learned. That the essence of Krishna consciousness is to constantly be offering your obeisances to the spiritual master. Constantly. In everything we do. That was the lesson I learned from this.
The next time we saw Srila Prabhupada was in 1974 in San Francisco Rath Yatra. And we had driven down again from Denver. And there were again a lot of wonderful devotees there, and Guru Kripa Swami at the time, and so many others. Vishnu Jan was there, and I think the most moving thing for me that time was how Srila Prabhupada was chanting Jai Radha Madhava in the temple room. And he was chanting so deeply. It was such an emotional chanting. I swear, I was standing about midway toward the back, and all I could do again was I got fixated on watching Srila Prabhupada. And to me, it looked like tears were coming from his eyes as he was chanting. And the devotees in front were also crying. It was such a wonderful emotional experience. And I think what I learned from that was how sincere a devotee has to be to really appreciate Krishna consciousness. And it helped me to appreciate Srila Prabhupada as an exalted devotee as he was.
Bhardaraj told me, I want you to make the first Prabhupada Murti. And so I said, well, I'm a brand new devotee. He said, well, that's okay. You're qualified. You can do it. I said, well, okay, if you say so. He said, we talked to Lochan and get his opinion about how to take pictures of Prabhupada. So I thought, well, I'll do that. And then I started making drawings of Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada's giving a class, and he's looking out across, and I got a profile view from his right side. And so I'm looking at Prabhupada and making a drawing. Now, I'm an old-time portrait artist, so I can do a portrait in a matter of a few minutes. But every time I looked up at Prabhupada, his face had changed. It was like a kaleidoscope. First, like the shape, the color, it was different people sitting there. He did a whole amazing thing just in front of my eyes. I don't know whoever saw it, but it actually was it was an amazing experience. And then I just gave up. I couldn't do it because it kept changing all the time. Second day I tried again, it was worse. I just closed my eyes, I just gave it up, and Prabhupada looked over at me, a smile. You can't capture the spiritual master that easy.
Maybe the next year in the manor, when Prabhupada came, he was staying, maybe I don't know, 74, 75, something like that. I was staying at the manor by then. My service was at the manor. And this time I was in the temple room. It was the middle of the afternoon. It's 4:15 in the afternoon. This I don't remember quite clearly, even the times. I was about middle of the afternoon, 4:15. I had a service which I was in a position of responsibility, so I could kind of like do my service in my own time, in a sense. And I would do a lot of reading and chanting. So I was in the temple room quite often in the afternoon, just reading and chanting. So I was chanting, sitting there against the wall, looking at the deities, chanting on my beads. It was about 4:15 in the afternoon. No one else. There's only one other person in the temple. Her name was Vitasya. I can't remember her name now. She was a model. She was a guest coming to the temple at the manor. She's quite famous. I think she may have passed away now, I think. But she was quite well known. She was a model in London. Say regal-looking lady. And she was coming regularly. She was chanting also. But she wasn't initiated at that time. She wasn't full-time. But she was in the temple. Suddenly the door opened at the back and Prabhupada walked in. He walked into the back of the temple. It was very unusual, 4:15 in the afternoon. I mean, I was there most days. The only time I saw Prabhupada walk in at that time. He decided apparently to go on an afternoon walk. He wanted to go for a walk for some reason. And even his servant wasn't with him. The only person with him was a devotee named Narendra, who was an English devotee, who happened to be sitting outside Prabhupada's room. And so he had picked up Srila Prabhupada's shoes, because Prabhupada presumably had told him he was going for a walk. So he picked up Prabhupada's shoes and was walking behind Prabhupada with the shoes in his hand. And Prabhupada, maybe I'm speculating, but Prabhupada walked straight down the stairs in a manner, and instead of going for a walk out, he went into the temple room. So Narendra came behind him with his shoes. Perhaps he didn't realize it, I don't know, but he just walked in behind him, carrying the shoes into the temple room. And so there's about 3 lessons to learn here. So then Prabhupada walked into the temple, and he immediately, Merciful Prabhupada immediately offered my obeisances, and I remembered how to offer my obeisances. So I put both hands on the floor, and I didn't have my back to the deities, nor towards Prabhupada. I did it sideways, like that in between. So he said nothing to me, but the guest, this Vitasya, she must have been quite shocked also, because wasn't expected. She offered her obeisances too, because she was literally a devotee, but she wasn't fully, aware of everything. But she paid her obeisances with her feet towards the deities, because Prabhupada was coming in at the back and the deities are at the other end, so she took with her head towards Prabhupada, her feet towards the deities. So Prabhupada looked, he saw, and then he said nothing to her. But he did, he went up towards the altar, and he said, "Where is the pujari? Where is the pujari?" And the pujari was there. It was a lady. I can't say I absolutely remember which one, but it was a lady. And a lady came out, one of the Matajis came out, they were washing, after the arti, after the bhoga offering, they were washing the dishes to the right side of the altar. They have a little paraphernalia room there. So they came out, and Prabhupada said, "Are you the pujari?" "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Washing the dishes, Srila Prabhupada." No. What are you doing? They didn't know what to say. I'm standing here. Whatever. What are you supposed to say? I can imagine what they were thinking. What does Prabhupada want me to say? And Prabhupada said, "You are the pujari." He said, "There is a guest in the temple, and you are not teaching them how to offer their obeisances properly." He said, "It is the pujari's responsibility to show the guest how to worship Krishna properly." That means to offer obeisance properly in front of the deity. And then Prabhupada, by this time a few other devotees had come in. A little boy named Shivadwar. Shivadwar, the son of Swati. Swati is a wonderful devotee from America. I'm sure she's been interviewed. And her son, little boy, he was very small, Prabhupada used to play with him a lot. There's many pictures of Prabhupada playing with him in a manner. He came in, and then Prabhupada said, "You offer your obeisances like this." Maybe there was only 3 or 4 others, she and his son, or maybe one other in the temple, as well as us 2 or 3. And Prabhupada then went down and offered the obeisance. He said, "You offer your obeisances never with your head or your feet towards the deity or towards the spiritual master." Of course, in some temples, like here, Prabhupada arranged his Vyasasana in such a way that you kind of do have your feet towards it, but the manner of the Vyasasana's at the back. So he made it clear there, at least, that's how you do it. And he said, though there was no one there to record, but he said, either your left side or your right side, but never with your feet or your head. And he paid his base. And Shivadwar, this little boy, came up right next to Prabhupada and just imitated him exactly, hands out straight, dandavats, and said, "What is your problem? Even a child can do it properly. Why you can't do it properly?" he said. He didn't talk to Riteshya at all. He was just talking to, I took it to me also, but especially to the pujari. He taught that lesson. Then Prabhupada got up and he turned around. We were all kind of like, because Prabhupada was in a little bit of a teaching mood, instructing mood. And Narendra was behind holding the shoes. And Prabhupada said, "What is this? You're holding the shoes right in front of the deities, Prabhupada said, "Never bring those in the temple room." And Narendra, flustered, he had a chadar. So he quickly wrapped the chadar around the nonsense, he said. Father said something like, this is another nonsense. And so, and then he walked out, and Narendra went behind, and that was that. He taught those lessons. We always be ready. It's the same thing. Any moment, the spiritual, we have to be ready at any moment. Not the spiritual master is only coming in a month's time. I don't need to worry. Let the house be dirty. Let this be this. Let that be that. We're tidied up when he comes, right? But we've got to be ready at every moment. That's what Prabhupada's teaching us. He's teaching us that Krishna's with us always. And the spiritual master reminds us of that. So, that's one lesson. Secondly, practical lesson. Don't bring shoes into the temple room. Even they were Prabhupada's shoes. They were outdoor shoes. He said, don't bring them in. And then offer your obeisances properly. Krishna's looking, it's not just mechanics. We've got to be conscious of what we're doing. Conscious. Even though we see, it's such a big thing, it's almost beyond retreat. Devotees here, they offer their obeisances to people with their backs towards Prabhupada in the samadhi, sometimes here and there. It's very unfortunate. They need to be taught how to offer their obeisances, not to have their feet towards Prabhupada in the samadhi or anywhere. I know it's difficult. Tulsi's over there, Prabhupada's over there, the data's over. But as much as possible, we have to do it. This is conscious. This is being conscious. So Prabhupada always taught us to be very conscious.
In Africa, I had most conversation with Prabhupada in East Africa, in Kenya, Nairobi, because there weren't so many devotees then, at that time, there. So I went on morning walks with them a couple of times, and after class every time I asked a question, because I heard that he was happy when we asked intelligent questions. Usually he chastised me. One time I asked about spiritual desires. He said, why are you asking about spiritual desires when your heart's full of material desires? He didn't answer anything else. Then another time I said, if we're preaching to Christians or Muslims, should we read their literatures, scriptures? He said, Christians? Have I ever said? He turned to Brahmananda was there and Chaivana, they were the GBCs at that time. He turned to them, have I ever talked about preaching to Christians? No, Srila Prabhupada. No, we are preaching to human beings. There was another time we were on a morning walk and I asked him how we should preach to the leaders. He said, yes, that Prabodhananda Saraswati has said. You go to them with a straw in your mouth, even these first class, loafer class. Go with a straw in your mouth and very humbly you say, my dear sir, I know you're a very learned person, you know everything, you're very, very educated. I just have one request. You please throw it all away. You follow Lord Chaitanya and chant Hare Krishna. So that was on the morning walk. Then we got back to the temple. And after the class that morning, I said, Srila Prabhupada, you explain how to preach to the leaders. So how do you preach to the ordinary people here? He said, yes, that we've explained. And he said he went right through the whole thing. Everyone was laughing, and he was also laughing. He really enjoyed that. Another time I asked him, somebody had suggested that I should get a fruit farm, buy a fruit farm. I didn't have any money, but anyway, they suggested that. So I asked Srila Prabhupada how we should support ourselves. He said, begging, selling books, how else? So I explained, and he said, no, it will not be effective. If you do for others, it will not be effective. And then he explained that we should be self-sufficient. You produce your own wheat, cotton, grains, beans, like this, five, 6 items, and become free from this money situation, economic situation, crazy, what do you call it, money civilization.
Because we were full of questions, because ultimately the painters were the first ones given all the questions. And then as making dioramas, we had to know also. And so we asked Prabhupada, what about Lord Brahma? And he says, should we give him a beard? He says, yes, give him that. He's an elderly person, so let him have a beard. What about tilak? Yes, tilak, no problem. And what about the color of Mother Yasoda? Some people say she was the color of Krishna. And Prabhupada, there's a quote there that Prabhupada, who started this? She's not the same color as Krishna. She has her own color. She's tan color. She's normal color. And so a lot of these things that may be misrepresented because people don't have the exact knowledge that came from Prabhupada. So we do have all that knowledge that Prabhupada delivered to us, in different ways of what different saints look like, and etc.
One morning we got a chance to go on a walk with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada went to this park where there's a big golf course. He got out of the car and started walking through the parking area, and walked up to the curb edge where the grass was, and he felt it with his cane. He didn't even step, he just sort of touched it with his cane, and oh no, it's wet. So Prabhupada didn't walk on the grass. He just walked back and forth in the parking facility. And at one point, one golfer came by and greeted Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, "Good morning." And the gentleman said, "Good morning," and went off on his way with his golf cart. And Prabhupada turned and said, "What is he doing?" And one of the devotees explained to him that, "Oh, he's playing golf, Srila Prabhupada. They take this stick and they hit this ball into a hole," and Prabhupada for a moment there, he just looked, and then he looked at the devotees, and I was standing right very close to him. And Prabhupada said, "Just see how they're wasting their valuable life."
I was the treasurer of the manor, so Prabhupada, sometimes I would get messages. One time he called me into his room on some, financial things, but it wasn't a lesson so much, it was a request to do things. But we get messages, we had to be very, very careful not to waste anything. We had no money. Every light, Prabhupada would check lights. In the manor, he'd go around, he'd check sometimes to see that the light was turned off as there was no one in the room, or a heater, or whatever it was. He was very particular not to waste a single thing, because everything belongs to Krishna. Nothing should be wasted, absolutely nothing.
Prabhupada spent quite a bit of time in that doll studio, and then the next thing he went to Murti, that Lochan finally finished, of Prabhupada. And it was done as an earlier version of Prabhupada, Radha Damodar. And so he had a silicone rubber head, and Prabhupada was looking down at the time when Prabhupada came to see it. And so there was a wooden rod inside. When he hit the motor, the head went up. And Prabhupada just smiled and just beamed, and it was just like, there's a picture about that. Somebody took a picture of Prabhupada at that moment. It's beautiful. So his recognizing the work that devotees were doing, he was so happy to see all of his work. He said, "I'm so happy that you're doing it." And it doesn't matter, he said, it doesn't matter what the handwriting is like, as long as you're writing, talking about the painting and the sculpture.
1976, I was in Prabhupada, when Prabhupada came in 76. I was the cook. I was the head cook at the manor for a while. And sometimes we weren't direct. I wasn't never directly cooked for Prabhupada, but sometimes the preparations would go for Prabhupada. And I remember chapatis particularly. That was a real experience, cooking chapatis, because we had there's 200 devotees visiting, in the manor. So we had to cook like 600 chapatis every lunchtime. It's quite we didn't have much choice. There's one really wonderful lady, I can't remember her name, devotee, disciple of Prabhupada, from Gujarat. She was really expert. So she was our main chapati cook. We had this big plate. She could cook like 16 chapatis at once. Really expert. So she would cook the chapatis, and sometimes some of the others have to get involved. I remember every chapati, because Harikesh that year was with Prabhupada, he would come down to get the prasadam, to the kitchen. We didn't have a separate deity kitchen in those days. It was one kitchen only. So everything was cooked there. So he would come down to get the prasad, and take up to Prabhupada in his room, lunchtime. So the chapatis were a big thing, because maybe Prabhupada chastised him or what, I don't know, but the chapatis had to be just perfect. Round, first cooked, they had to puff up like, fully like a balloon almost, and little black dots evenly spread all over, not burned but there has to be these little pock marks all over it, just perfect. He said, "What's wrong with you? You can't get these chapatis right there." Prabhupada's not happy. So then he started trying. He couldn't get it right. No, he just wouldn't work. But it was another lesson. Everything should be done nicely for Srila Prabhupada, perfectly cooked, and very nice. Prabhupada just teaching us, because it's for Krishna, we should do things nicely. and not just, who cares? But he's teaching us how to do things for the pleasure of Krishna, the pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada, that's what it's always teaching us, how we can become eligible, basically speaking. Because unless we're pleasing Krishna, we're not eligible.
So I was in Africa, then I went back to UK, and I was at Bhaktisiddhanta Manor when Srila Prabhupada came last time, 1977. And that time once, Bhaktisiddhanta, he was then, brahmachari, he came from America through London to go to India to arrange for the Life Comes from Life Festival. So when he arrived, there was a message, I went to the airport to find him, to meet him. So when we arrived, there was a message immediately from Srila Prabhupada that he should go and see Prabhupada immediately. Because Prabhupada was really emphasizing scientific preaching. So we went up, the two of us, and Prabhupada was asking, what he's been doing. Actually, he offered obeisances to Prabhupada. Before he got up even, Prabhupada started preaching about how important this scientific preaching is. And Prabhupada said, he was talking a little, he said, we're not animals, that we deny education. But if you use your education to prove that God doesn't exist, this is a waste of time. He said, people are suffering so much for this. And he was crying like anything. Sarva karana karanam. And then he kind of calmed down, and then he asked Swarabdhamata, so who is this? And Swarabdhamata said, this is Jnana das Srila Prabhupada. He's an Oxford scientist. So Prabhupada looked at me and said, so, do you agree? I said, yeah, I agree, Srila Prabhupada. I feel like he put something in my heart at that time.
After the fire yajna, I was asked to go into Srila Prabhupada's room for the Brahman's thread and the Gayatri. And I went into Srila Prabhupada's room and offered my obeisances, nice and loud. And Prabhupada motioned to me to come sit next to him. So I got, fairly close, but he said, no, come closer. So I was real close. So we were like, 2 inches away. And Prabhupada asked me to put out my hand, and he grabbed it, and he began showing me how to chant the Gayatri on my fingers. And he said, okay, now you do it. And so I did it, and I thought I did it right, and he said, no, do it again. And so I was shaking like a flag in the wind. I didn't know what was left or right or up or down. I was just so happy to be close to where Srila Prabhupada was, and it was unsettling to say the least. But again, he said, do it one more time, do it again. And I said, so I went through it again, and he said, no. And then he looked at me, and he said in a very nice, loving way, I didn't feel chastised, but I felt so grateful for it. He said, how can I teach you if you can't remember? And I felt like a worm, under 10,000 rocks. I was thinking to myself, actually the first thing that came to my mind was, wait a second, I did this right, but no, then I caught myself in my mind. I was like, no, you can't think like that. And I did it. I couldn't even say anything. I just did it one more time again, and I did it real slow and carefully. And when after the third time, Srila Prabhupada, he said, "Oh, very good. That was very good." And then he took the thread and he just sort of tossed it. And it just sort of floated and landed over me. He didn't even have to, he didn't go through any big ordeal to put it on me. He just took it and he sort of tossed it. I was sitting to his left, I remember. And then he said, okay, that's very nice. And again, the lesson was that I as a disciple, one should never become presumptuous and think that you know something before your spiritual master. That's a no-no. One should always be meek and humble, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that Prabhupada said that. That line just has stuck in my head my whole life. That if you can't remember what the spiritual master is telling you, then how do you expect to advance in spiritual life? If you can't remember, then how can someone teach you? If you can't, then you have to do something to focus your mind so that you can remember. You have to follow the practices of Krishna consciousness so that you can remember. I'm so grateful that Srila Prabhupada corrected me like that, and I'm so thankful that I didn't open my big mouth. I'm so grateful that I did not open up my big mouth and start thinking that, no, wait a second, I did that right. No.
Experience with Prabhupada, and it culminated mainly in Vrindavan, because it was always hard to get near Prabhupada in the beginning. Let me say one morning walk. All the fake guys were on a morning walk, and Prabhupada was walking really fast. And as we were approaching Prabhupada, I saw that he wasn't touching the ground. He was gliding, he was going really fast. It was Venice Beach on the top in the park area. So he was just touching the ground, just going along, moving very fast. Everybody behind him was half running to catch up with Prabhupada. Now Prabhupada's in this advanced age, but all these young guys, they couldn't keep up with him. And so I got closer to him and we joined the party. And then Rameshwari asked always wonderful questions all the time. So Prabhupada said one thing about the seer is the same in a waking and sleeping state. Now, for me, that didn't make any sense at that time. But everything Prabhupada said was mysterious.
I was cooking the milk sweets for the day. It was late at night. There was one other devotee and they were washing the pots, and I was cooking the milk sweets. And Prabhupada hadn't been eating much for a few days. I think he was all sick. And then suddenly Harikesh ran into the kitchen. He said, Prabhupada wants to eat right now. Like 10 o'clock at night. Very unusual. Something like that. He said he wants khichdi. Khichdi. I mean, he said he wants it before, I think he gave 30 minutes. It must be ready by such and such a time. We put everything down and all together, three of us, really try to get it together to get that khichdi ready for Prabhupada. Rushing. And it was like 2 minutes late. Harikesh ran up the stairs, and then about 5 minutes later he came down and he said, I'm finished. He didn't say nothing, he just said, I'm finished. Prabhupada said you were too late. It's too late. He wanted it by 10:30, it was like maybe 5 minutes late. He said, take it. You're teaching many lessons, always be on time. Prabhupada was, generally speaking, very like that, always on time. And we weren't trained like that. We weren't so much, because he was teaching that, don't be late. Everything should be on time. I don't think it was so much about Harikesh being finished, but or that it was khichdi. It was a lesson in being on time, always like that. But one thing I really felt about Srila Prabhupada is that he taught very much so to live in the present, not to live in the past. We can very often rely on the past or dream of the future. But he taught us to live in the present and do the needful. according to time, place, and circumstance. And what may be applicable in one place may not always be, applicable in another place. He taught this not just being dexterous, but also being, open like that, to see what works, and not just stick only to one, this is it, type of thing. The goal is the same, the philosophy is the same, but I saw that he taught the method of presenting the philosophy has to work. Otherwise, what's the use if it doesn't work? He said to present the same message, it's like packaging an item for the market or whatever. You've got to know how to package it in such a way that the people will take the medicine. Otherwise, what's the use? You've got the medicine, the people aren't going to take it. What's the use? So I felt Prabhupada also taught that. And it's very difficult in this materialistic world in Kali Yuga, no doubt. But Prabhupada was able to do that. And he told us to do so also. How to present the same message in the present time, place, and circumstance. So I think that's a practical lesson, a very important. It's not so much an emotional lesson or a quality lesson, but a practical lesson for the spreading of Krishna consciousness. And that's really the essence of his coming to the West. It's not just to, go there, it's to present and preach Krishna consciousness and present it in a way that people will take it. So in that same mood, others may not agree, but we should also have that same willingness to be guided like that, to present Krishna consciousness in a way which is effective, without compromising the actual principles, without compromising the philosophy and so on like that, or the objective goals.
We again saw Srila Prabhupada, had the good fortune of being in Chicago when Srila Prabhupada went there for a visit. I remember very vividly how Srila Prabhupada was chanting on the Vyasasana. He was leading the kirtan. And he was facing a Kishore Kishori. He was at the far end, and the devotees were in between. And they started dancing back and forth. And they started getting really wild, dancing back and forth, and Prabhupada stopped it. And he said, "But we don't dance like that. We just dance back and forth to the Swami in a very proper, gentle way, a gentlemanly way." And instead, the devotees were, they were racing back and forth, bumping into each other. And that a similar thing happened in Mayapur a year later, when the devotees were also a little too enthusiastic. But it stuck in my mind how Srila Prabhupada wanted us to dance in a very respectful way, in a proper way, in a more reverential way, and not just some careless jumping around, like some mash pit or something. After Prabhupada spoke, there was some prasadam given, and Prabhupada had had a plate of prasadam, and he tasted one of the items, and he said, "Who has put salt in the halava? Where's the cook?" So they asked the cook to come, and the cook had to come before Srila Prabhupada. This was Prabhupada's on the Vyasasana, and all these devotees are here, and the cook has to come up. And I felt so sorry for them. And Prabhupada asked, "What is this? You've put salt in the halava." And the cook, I won't mention her name, but she said, "Oh, Krishna's mercy. Oh, it was the wrong thing to say." And Prabhupada, he was very, he didn't explode, but Prabhupada said, "No, it is your foolishness." And what I understood from that was that everything we do in Krishna consciousness, we should be very attentive to, even the smallest details. Even the smallest details. Because Krishna is there in the heart and he's aware of what we're doing, as is the spiritual master. It's not that you're hiding off in some place or nobody knows what you're doing, no. But Krishna is there, these spiritual masters there, and one has to be very attentive in offering your service to Krishna. It's an important practice. Otherwise, how do you expect to develop devotion? It doesn't work like that.
After some time, he returned to India. And I also went to India to take part in that Life Comes from Life conference. So I was in Vrindavan when Srila Prabhupada arrived. I was really shocked. I mean, in UK he was thin. But when he arrived then, he was just like a skeleton. It was terrible. So he was in Krishna Balaram Mandir for I don't know how many months. 3-4 months, I suppose. And we were preparing for the conference. And we go in and be in Srila Prabhupada's rooms. Devotees would be 1 or 2 devotees massaging one arm, 1 or 2 devotees massaging the other arm, like 1 on each leg. At one time he was lying on his bed. He could practically he couldn't move. And practically he was blind, also physically blind. So he was lying with his head pointing the opposite direction. And I was like right close to my head, right down on the bed. And then he turned his head over and he was like looking right at me, like that distance. So he said, "Who is this?" And I don't know, Bhaktisiddhanta Tamakrishna Maharaj or someone. So this is Jnana das Nemi, Prabhupada, he's Oxford scientist and Prabhupada. That was it. We had the first day of the conference. He was very worried. He sent over this bust of him in his rooms in Krishna Balaram. So he sent that over so that we would know that he was with us. And all day he was asking, how are they getting on, because there were all sorts of people, Mayavadis and materialists, all sorts there. So the devotees, they were joking because institute scientists were going around in suits. Shirt, tie, trousers, pants. So I read in a conversation book later, somebody said to Prabhupada, the scientists are dressed in suits. Someone had said already, they look like Mormons. And he was going to say that. And Prabhupada cut in, he said, yes, they look very elegant. He was quite happy. So at the end of the conference, first day, straightway there was a message from Srila Prabhupada that we should come and see him straight away. So we didn't have time to shower or change or anything. So we got into his room, and Tamakrishna said, "Srila Prabhupada, the scientists have come. They're just in suits." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, bring them chairs." Because he knew it's difficult to sit on the floor with trousers. So there weren't any chairs. Oh, they found 2, and there were about 7 of us. So we had the 2 chairs, and we just pretended to sit on chairs. He couldn't see at that time much. So we pretended to sit on chairs, and he said, "So they're all sitting comfortably?" "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." And then he started preaching and telling us how important this scientific preaching was like that.
There's a moment when Tamal Krishna was telling Prabhupada, he said that you mentioned in Bombay that the diagram I'm making would make your mission successful around the world. Is that true? Yes, of course. He says, because well, we have the changing body in the window at Fate in LA, and people are always stopping and asking questions. They want to know the story behind it. And so change of body means from birth to death in one shot. And so people are curious about that. They want to know about what happens between the 2 points. And so he said, well, give them Bhagavad Gita, that explains it. And so, but the whole reason for diorama is that you can explain everything without a word. And so that's what my Guru Maharaj wanted. he wanted dioramas to glorify Krishna and Lord Chaitanya and to be preaching like that as an art form. So he wasn't opposed to any kind of art form, that's for sure. I mean, the paintings and the sculpture, everything embellished and gave more impetus to his preaching. And so the change of body was a very important preaching tool, because ultimately, and that's what the diorama art is all about, is to give everything in a single glance, a whole message, very strong. And so, but then supplemented by the literature, by Bhagavad Gita, that's what he wanted. So he was very strong about that, and he wanted it to happen, but it's not easy. I mean, Prabhupada wanted to, catch the rhinoceros, but it wasn't all that easy to do. So we tried our best, and we did what we could in that time frame.
In Vrindavan, Prabhupada, during that same festival time, would have darshan in the evening, and we were able to squeeze in a couple times. And although Srila Prabhupada was, in much of it he spoke Hindi, he was so casual and friendly with some of the local devotees, Brijbasis, and you could see how they were so fascinated by and not only fascinated, but I guess they were so thankful and also respectful how Srila Prabhupada had gone off like this to the West and brought back so many of these Westerners who were just enthusiastic to chant and read and visit the holy places of Vrindavan. And they would sit in Prabhupada's class. In the evening, Prabhupada would give Hindi class, and devotees didn't understand a thing, but they would all sit there and just be able to see Srila Prabhupada. And the pilgrims would come in, and they'd be fascinated to see how all of this is happening by the work of this incredible person. What stood out for me in Vrindavan was how in this sacred place, these locals could see how Srila Prabhupada has created such a wonderful sacred place as Krishna Balaram Mandir. It was very, very special.
Srila Prabhupada, as we all know, was in health condition, was very poorly, extremely. And then in August '77, he decided to come to London. He had other plans, not just London, but at least he came to London. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there. I think Upendra, I can't remember. I think Upendra came to Prabhupada. One or two others. They came, and we didn't have much notice, maybe 2 or 3 days notice of Prabhupada's coming in '77. We were on a constant marathon. And this is another major thing. It was wonderful because in a few weeks, so 10 days' time, the Prabhupada book marathon starts. So then in '77, from about, I guess it's April when Prabhupada's health, March, April when Prabhupada's health started to noticeably deteriorate, we started a non-stop book marathon. It was understood that book distribution was the most pleasing. Everything's pleasing, services, but we had this thought anyway, that book distribution will please Prabhupada, will keep him with us through book distribution. This is how we felt Prabhupada's presence. So we felt his presence in dedicating our lives to distribute books. So that time I was the Sankirtan coordinator, kind of leader of the Sankirtan in the UK. It was very, we were on such a non-stop book distribution marathon, whatever way we were trying. We were doing records as well, but primarily books. All over the world, mostly the Western world in those days. India was not very developed in those days, not like now. And in Australia, in America, in Europe particularly, maybe a few other places, devotees were going out full-on book distribution. They were like a competitive, Prabhupada created this kind of exciting, competitive spirit amongst us to distribute more books. So we were going flat out there. It was really, almost day to day, it was like, what's the score? This and that from France and Germany and the West Coast and the East Coast and here in Australia. We were like trying to do more than everybody else for Prabhupada, We thought this would please Prabhupada. The whole essence is we may feel it's to please Prabhupada, but Prabhupada is just bringing this out. What pleases Krishna? So that's what pleases Krishna, see his message spread. So we were doing like that. Then we had almost every available person in both the manor and in Bury Place. We're still in Bury Place then. Everyone on Sankirtan, literally men and women. We had women's traveling parties, men's traveling parties, going anywhere we could. I won't mention some of the places we were going because, well, they were other GBC zones, wherever we could go to the shoot for. And then maybe 2 days before, we got a message that Srila Prabhupada is coming. And we've been, honestly speaking, have been paying less attention to other areas of devotional service, mostly concentrating on book distribution. Daily worship was going on as normal, but the cows, the gardens, and cleanliness, many things that were not as they should be. So we really knew, Prabhupada, we knew from every year he came that Srila Prabhupada would look at whatever needed to be looked at. He had this unique knack of going exactly where the problem was. You clean everything, but there's one area which wasn't done. Srila Prabhupada, it's like he didn't see the areas that were good. He would go straight to the area that was untidy or where the garbage was or something. Why is this like this? He had this kind of, because he was guided by the Super Soul, no doubt. He would do that. So we knew that. So we weren't many devotees at the manor for the first day or so because we had to call them all back from Sankirtan. So there's just a handful of us there trying to clean the whole place. The lake, we have a lake at the manor, was dirty. There was all kinds of stuff in the lake. And we knew that Prabhupada, we were still thinking Prabhupada's going to go on his morning walk, he's going to be giving class every day, he's going to go around and inspect the place. We weren't thinking that he was like basically, whatever you want to call it, his body was basically invalid. We weren't thinking like, and that's how we should always think. We shouldn't think, well, he's not going to look at it anyway. Krishna sees everything. The Prabhupada was teaching us that everything should be done properly for Krishna's pleasure. So we were desperately trying to get that place. There were fallen leaves everywhere and branches, and the rubbish hadn't been cleared away properly, and there's stuff in the lake, and we were going everywhere, and it started to rain. For 2 days it practically rained non-stop. We were out there in the rain, in the lake. I remember back to Chaitanya Maharaj. I don't know if you've interviewed him. You have to find his, but my memory is he was practically up to his neck in the lake trying to get things out, and it was raining, and we were getting cold, and it was real yuck. And then the devotees come in. We tried to get it as clear as we could, and then we had to bring Prabhupada from the airport. We didn't really know exactly what condition he was in, and there was some event going on in London, some official event. We couldn't get a car for the life of us of a decent nature. There were no Rolls, no Daimlers, nothing was available. Nothing. We couldn't get any decent car. Eventually, because I was involved in trying to get the cars and others too, and eventually we ended up with the latest Rover, which is, there's nothing spectacular, but it's all right. And we managed to hire this Rover. George Harrison wasn't around. We got this Rover. George Harrison would sometimes, of course, give his car that Prabhupada's used. And there was a few others who would, but everything was blocked. We couldn't get a vehicle. So we got this Rover, which wasn't very big. I mean, it's bigger than a normal little car, but it was not particularly big. And it's not, it's just, whatever it is. So we got this car, and I had to drive it, for various reasons. So this is the only time I drove Prabhupada. I got in the car, the first thing I said, where's the gear stick? There was no gear stick. Oh, this is automatic. I said, what? I'd never heard of a car with automatic. It was a new thing, at least in England. an automatic car. It was a new car. It was the car of the year for its style, you know. It's automatic. And I didn't know what to do. I was like going to the airport in this car, and I put my foot down, and it was the brake instead. And boom, the car would come to. I was having paranoia that this was going to happen if I'm driving Prabhupada back to the manor, you know. Oh, it was such an ordeal driving this car. And then I got to the airport, and I was sat in the car outside. We must have got some permission to sit outside the arrivals hall, because you can't normally do that. We were there, and they got special clearance from Prabhupada for sure. And then I was sat at the wheel, like a little bit, nervous and concerned that, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? It was such a struggle getting to the airport, you know. And then with Prabhupada in the car, and then I had the shock of my life, because Tamal Krishna Maharaj was with Prabhupada, and I'd already had a few experiences with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And I knew how, if Prabhupada may have said something or not, you know, Tamal Krishna was really, it was like a volcano if you didn't do it right, you know. And I was like, oh my God. I was sat there, and Tamal Krishna came, and then Prabhupada came, I think Upendra and one other devotee, and then I saw Srila Prabhupada. He was so thin. His body was so thin and gaunt. They were carrying him, you know, placed him in the back seat. I could hardly look. They placed him in the back seat, and then servants sat next to him, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj sat right next to me in the front seat. And I'm there driving the car out of the airport. Yeah, like 500% attentive, you know, to everything. Right foot, left foot, carefully driving like anything, you know. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj starts asking me questions. And it's like, oh God, you know. I couldn't get it together, you know. It was really difficult. By Krishna's grace alone, I was able to achieve it without any. There was one hitch. When I pressed the accelerator instead of the brake, and we went forward at this roundabout. But at that moment, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was talking to Prabhupada. We never saw him. Fortunately, there was nothing coming, so we just kind of glided through. But other than that, Prabhupada actually asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj to ask me some questions. And one of them was to put the window down. The window was down, then Tamal said, put it up. And Prabhupada said, no, put it down. You can never really know the mind of a pure devotee, you know, whether he's teaching us there or not. And then he asked some questions. Now, we were distributing books as much as anyone else in the world at that time. It was very close. France, West Coast, England, they were very close competition like that. So I thought, and we were making devotees. Janananda Swami was there in England, and we had an amazing Bhakti program. And Prabhupada was really inspired by this Bhakti program. I mean, he really was. I mean, so many devotees joining, even encouraged a newsletter, Sankirtan newsletters, all these things were going on. And Prabhupada was very pleased with all of that. So I was convinced, because I was Sankirtan leader, kind of was at least the coordinator. And I was thinking, if Prabhupada asks anything, he's going to talk about Sankirtan, book distribution, because, you know, that's what we're into, and that's what we're doing. So Prabhupada wants to ask a question. And so I'm expecting, how many devotees you've made, how many books you distributed. He didn't mention any of that. All he was asking about were, how are the cows? How are the cows? How many cows? How much milk? Who's looking after the cows? And so on. All kinds of questions. And I must say, it was one of the most embarrassing times of my life. I knew nothing practically. I didn't even know how many cows there were. I knew next to nothing. That was what was on Prabhupada's mind, the cows. Then we heard, again, of course, probably through Tamal Krishna Maharaj later on, that Srila Prabhupada had come to London, specifically because of the love of his disciples, his followers, his devotees. And they, after a little while, of course, hundreds of them came from Germany and maybe France and different countries, came to England to have that time with Prabhupada. Prabhupada wanted to see all of his devotees. He wanted to be with his devotees. As in 72, he wanted to be with his devotees. Same thing in 77. He wanted to be with his devotees. That was his life. But he also had a very important mission, and I believe, from what we heard and what we read also, that Srila Prabhupada wanted to go to America, stopping in London, but his intention was to go to the States, particularly Gita Nagari, because Gita Nagari was a farm which had been acquired. It was a very excellent farm. We still have that beautiful farm. And Prabhupada wanted to show us how to establish this Varna ashram aspect of ISKCON. That's what he was talking about in London, mostly. He also was very eager to hear the book scores. One of his secretaries or servant, somebody, was not very enthusiastic about the book scores being brought to Prabhupada because his health was so much he didn't want to get excited, you know. But Prabhupada said, no, this is our life and soul. He wanted to hear the scores every day. But he was particularly talking about Varna Ashram, how important this was for our movement, for ISKCON. It's not just a matter of individuality, but it's to actually create a society which the whole world can live in. The whole world cannot live in temples. It's a society which goes way beyond the realms of the temple president or the temple. It is a society which includes everything. That's what Prabhupada was looking at, as far as I can see. And the cows, his talking to me about the cows was center point. Center point. Without the protection of the cows, there is no human society. Everything is, dependent, basically speaking, on Krishna's pleasure. And how can we please Krishna if we don't serve the cows?
So it happened at that time when Prabhupada came to the Dal studio that many things took place at that time. And one of the major deals was when Prabhupada was asking about the angels on the sky. Clamped to the walls of the upper level of the Dal studio were all these Gandharvas. And then the Gandharvas, Prabhupada said, they don't have wings. And ultimately, then it went on to this change in body display that I had the fortune of making a small one. And so I did the small diorama, and Bhardaraj was presenting this small diorama to Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada looked at it and he said, Srila Prabhupada, would you like this for your room? And Prabhupada looked at it and shook his head. My room? In other words, he didn't have to know he wasn't his body or he was going to be changing his body. He predicted that would happen for all of us. And so, but it was a heavy statement, but ultimately it was meant that we're not in control of our lives, it just, we go through and the laws of karma are working. Prabhupada was instructing us all across the board in everything he did, every move, every function. There was definitely an educational system set up here. Teaches where we have to be taught on the basic stuff of just how to clean yourself and all that stuff we know about. Okay, now here's the divine moment when he's going to instruct us how to leave the body. Now we all got to go through that, and he said that, of course. There's going to be a time when we all have to go through it. Don't think you're going to be privileged not have to go through it. Okay, so the time is coming. Earlier, the Kaviraj was saying your uric acid is killing, is poisonous. So it's building up, and if you don't relieve that, if you don't pass, ultimately you're going to go. And so he said, you're going to leave about 7:30 at night. This was in the morning, about 11:30. So it got to be, we came into the room just before that, and it was like 7:10, just before he left. And then all of the kirtan was roaring, and the whole thing, it was going up through the roof, And so I looked up above our heads, and I could feel all this energy coming down on us, Prabhupada talked about, another learning experience, that talking to the four walls or talking to an empty audience doesn't matter, because ultimately Narada Muni shows up a couple times. Then there was one time in LA, the kirtan was uproarious and went right through the roof, and so the sky opened up, and you might have been there for that. It was just like unbelievable. And so then he said later, well, Narada Muni came, Brahma came, and Indra, they all were laughing like anything. I thought, what is this? And we asked, why were they laughing? He said, because of the Yavanas and the Malechas dancing and joining in the kirtan. It's just unbelievable. And so the demigods show up once in a while in Prabhupada's presence. So of all the instructions, I think the top instruction was about leaving his body. I mean, that was really an amazing moment. When he did leave, everything disappeared. All that energy that was in the room just, pow, flash, it's gone. So Prabhupada's mission became his institution. It happened that fast.
So back to the manor in 77, Prabhupada would sometimes, because he'd always pass it on to his spiritual master, always the mercy of my Guru Maharaj. He would always remind us of that. It is not us, it's the mercy of one's Guru Maharaj. So then on his birthday, on his Vyasa Puja day, towards the end, and at this point I was a little close, I got close, somehow, I don't know why or how, but I was pretty close to the Vyasa Sam. And then the devotees in the kitchen, because I wasn't cooking that year, but the devotees in the kitchen had prepared a beautiful cake for Srila Prabhupada. And they put candles. In the West it's tradition to put candles on the cakes. So they put many candles on the cake. So the cake came before Prabhupada. Prabhupada obviously looked at the candle, looked at the cake, and you could hear it, got the message whispered in his servant's ear. How many candles are there on the cake? And they said 81. You could hear 81. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, 82. Now, in Western world, it would have been 81. But Prabhupada used to do this. He would go by the Asian system of dating. And it's quite logical. When you're born, that's your first birthday. It's not your 0 birthday, it's your first birthday. So this is your 82nd, not your 81st. Isn't it? Logic. He told us a different logic, to readjust our logic. We're so attached to our Western so-called logics, I suppose. Doesn't matter. Either way, but anyway, he taught us like that.
I think for me the most important thing that, or the thing that's impacted me the most has been Srila Prabhupada's kindness. My experience in material world, whatever experience I have, is that it's a very harsh place, and to find a friend is very, very difficult. So when I saw and had the opportunity to meet Srila Prabhupada, I felt that this is a real friend. This is a real, genuine, kind person who is there to help us through whatever challenges are there, and bring us closer to Krishna. I think that's the thing that stands out the most for me, how kind and loving he was to his followers, to people.
Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. I saw that Srila Prabhupada had this ability to exactly reciprocate with each and every person perfectly, to encourage them and to help them in their lives to become Krishna conscious. That's what I felt, that he had this ability to just know the hearts of others and give exactly the reciprocation that was required. Like when I took initiation, actually as soon as I went in Prabhupada's room, I was nervous, but as soon as I got in there, Prabhupada, just his glance on me, the nervousness went away. I felt relaxed. He could see that I was a lost case almost. He didn't even, I know he gave a little instruction on it. He gave that a very sweet way to me at that time, to offer obeisances properly. That's why he gave me a sweet bowl as well. He had this ability to know what was required to, encourage that devotee. No matter that one, sometimes it'd be very heavy because that person either needed it, could take it, or whatever it was. So he knew what was just required. He's in touch with the Super Soul, in touch with the spiritual master. There was no false ego at all. Just pure transparency. And if you want to say one thing, which was a quality, you could see he had nothing to get from anyone. He had only the quality to give, to love, no matter what. He was always giving love. He was always giving. Although we may say, well, he asked this, he asked that, but that was only out of love, to try to help us to come to our senses, wake up, get out of this dukkhalaya mashashvatam, get out of Maya.
Now, one thing is how much he loved his devotees. Very intense love. And had so much faith in them. How he pushed on, he was very, very resolute. He knew from way back, he met with Srila Saraswati Prabhupada in 1922. And he knew, like from that time, what his mission was. And how he continued anyway, so much inconceivable difficulty in America. And after he started the movement also. But at the beginning he was so lonely and just without resources of any kind, completely dependent on Krishna. He didn't want to be there, but anyway he continued. And completely out of his any kind of familiar culture, completely. Alone in New York, practically no money, no friends, no contacts. Like such a different culture. Culture of enjoying, controlling, drugs, everything, drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Whole thing, that was what it was all about. And he came to give something totally different. So he just never gave up. Somewhere he said, I'm not one to be discouraged. He just kept going, kept going. And how much love for Krishna also. If you see, there's so many pictures of Srila Prabhupada, and all of them, he's got very strong, emotions. He's showing very strong feelings, very strong emotions. There's no boring pictures of Prabhupada. Amazing, amazing personality, just constantly. He was like a huge river of emotion, transcendental emotion. There's one really nice video, I think maybe it's New Vrindavan, I don't know. And he's explaining to somebody, you're not this body, spirit soul is separate from the body, time of death, reincarnation, like that. I mean, it's ordinary stuff, but he's in ecstasy. It's really extraordinary, really extraordinary.
One time I went with a group of devotees to the airport to see Srila Prabhupada away, perhaps in '76. And Prabhupada was sat there. The flight was delayed. We were sitting up. The flight was delayed by several hours. So we went up to the mezzanine floor. There was a place you could sit to wait for the call for the airplane. It was a little bit more laid back in those days. So we were sat in the mezzanine floor. We were sat on the floor. Prabhupada was sitting on a chair. And I could see Prabhupada looking over what do you call it? Not the wall, but the sort of thing, whatever there. Looking down onto the area below where people were running around to catch their flights, checking in, this, that, the other. And Prabhupada was looking down. And I could see tears coming down his eyes, pouring. And I got the feeling that, that Srila Prabhupada was feeling that, paradukha dukha. He was feeling so much distress, so much, that feeling of pain for the suffering of others, how they were aimlessly going about their lives, running for God knows what. Prabhupada was always feeling like that, compassion. Whatever he did, it was in the mood of compassion, to help others to, save their lives. Because we're all so ignorant. And, everything he did was to help us also to save our lives.
True.